we are live. Just a minute. Just wait a few seconds and we start, okay?
Do we need to enable interpretation on our Zoom, or?
No, just if you want to hear our, like when someone is speaking in Portuguese, if you want to hear in English, so you select.
Okay.
So Primi, do we need to change channels if we speak Portuguese?
No.
No, okay.
Okay, let me see if just if you want to hear like another language. Bom, eu vou começar então, tá bom? Aqui, deixa eu ver aqui se Bom, então vamos iniciar, que a gente já tá ao vivo, tá certo? Bom, boa tarde. Eu queria agradecer então a todos que estão participando em nome da Associação Brasileira de Avaliação Educacional, em nome do Instituto Ayrton Senna, né? A gente está aqui então para começar esse webinário sobre criatividade, né? Eu tenho aqui a honra de receber três grandes pesquisadores, uma pessoa da OCDE, tem dois grandes pesquisadores, e também a Tatiana Felgueiras do Instituto Ayrton Senna, né? Antes de eu apresentar o currículo dos nossos palestrantes hoje, eu queria então convidar a Tatiana para ter uma palavrinha aqui para iniciar, e depois a gente começa então, eu faço a apresentação e a gente já inicia as apresentações. Vamos lá então.
Obrigada, Primi. Maria Helena me convidou para trazer pouquinhas palavras aqui para vocês na abertura desse evento. Tenho algumas coisas em comum com a Maria Helena, né? Uma delas é a preocupação sobre como a gente pode inovar em política pública educacional. A segunda coincidência, né, que temos com a Maria Helena ambas temos o Primi como líder aí dos nossos comitês científicos. Ele está tanto nessa cadeira aí na ABAV, quanto ele ocupa essa cadeira no Instituto Ayrton Senna, que há alguns anos tem um EduLab, né, que é um laboratório de ciências para a educação. Qual é a missão do EduLab? A gente procura, na ciência, quais são os potenciais humanos que são capazes de serem desenvolvidos em escala, né? E a gente tinha projetos anteriores a esse, mas a gente tentou fazer as contas agora, eu e o Primi, a gente está falando de mais ou menos 8 anos que teve início o nosso estudo nessa frente de pensamento crítico e criatividade. Então, iniciamos aí com uma super resenha de literatura, né, que o Primi trouxe, um estudo que a gente vai lançar brevemente. E em 2016, a OCDE, via série, né, nos convidou para fazer parte de um projeto que levaria pilotos do desenvolvimento de competências de criatividade e pensamento crítico em dezenas de países, né? E o Brasil fez parte via essa parceria aí com o Instituto Ayrton Senna e com a rede de Chapecó, né? Enfim, no sul aí do país. Depois disso foram alguns marcos, né? A gente lançou materiais para professores, a gente lançou instrumentos formativos, sempre com a preocupação de entender que existe sim um potencial de desenvolvimento dessas competências que são importantes para viver e atuar no século XXI em política pública, dentro da escola. Então, esse é o papel do EduLab, né? Fazer essa ponte aí entre o que vocês desenvolvem como pesquisadores, como cientistas, e o que é necessário chegar em sala de aula. Então, assim, queria desejar um super evento para todos vocês e parabenizar aqui pela iniciativa, Primi.
Bom, obrigado, Tatiana. Eu estou aguardando a Maria Helena, que é presidente da BAV, ela está só com um probleminha no link, estou só vendo se ela entra. Enquanto isso, eu vou apresentar os palestrantes de hoje e depois vamos ver se ela consegue entrar aqui, senão acho que ela dá uma palavrinha para a gente na discussão, né? Mas, bom, a gente vai ter então 3 apresentações, né? A primeira do professor Roger Beaty, a Maria Helena chegou agora, né? Olá, Marilena, tudo bem? O Roger Beaty é professor assistente e diretor do Centro de Neurociência Cognitiva da Criatividade da Penn State University, né? Ele fez doutorado na Universidade de Norte Califórnia, em Greensboro, e o laboratório estuda uma série de aspectos de psicometria, neuroimagem, estudando a cognição, né, os mecanismos neurais da cognição e de criatividade em diferentes domínios, né? A segunda apresentação vai ser do professor Mathias Benedeck, da Universidade de Graz, da Áustria. Ele também é do Instituto de Psicologia da Universidade e ele é diretor do Laboratório de Cognição Criativa, né? Faz pesquisas também nessa área de processos cognitivos, né? Bases neurais dos processos cognitivos da criatividade, também pesquisas em psicometria e avaliação, né? Tanto inteligência quanto personalidade, né? Ele fez mestrado também na Universidade de Graz e doutorado na Universidade de Kiel, na Alemanha. E a terceira apresentação vai ser do Mário Piacentini. O Mário, então, ele é um analista sênior da OCDE, né? E trabalha no Pisa e coordena as avaliações inovativas. Então, o Mário coordenou a avaliação de competência global, né, em 2018, um domínio, né, de avaliação inovativa em 2018, competência global. Depois, agora, esse ano que está ocorrendo a avaliação de criatividade, e em 2025 também ele está preparando a avaliação chama Learning in Digital World, né? O Mário, então, ele tem doutorado em economia da Universidade de Genebra. Então, a gente tem um time aqui da pesada hoje para falar sobre todos esses assuntos. Antes de começar, então, eu queria agora passar a palavra para a Marilena, que é presidente da BAV, para então nos iniciar essa nossa atividade. Bem-vinda, então, Marilena.
Bom, muito obrigada. Eu peço mil desculpas pelo meu atraso. Era tanto link que eu me perdi. Não achei o link para poder falar, só tinha o link como convidada, mas, enfim, é uma honra muito grande para nós, da ABAV, Associação Brasileira de Avaliação Educacional, estarmos fazendo hoje um seminário com um time de especialistas desta qualidade, né? Eu entendo que nós temos hoje aqui o Mário Piacentini, que é o único que eu já conhecia, né? O Mário Piacentini, que é da OCDE, é um consultor da OCDE, que tem feito muitos trabalhos nessa área de criatividade. Não conhecia os professores Mathias Benedeck e os professores Roger Beaty. Eu agradeço, né? Eu li a biografia dos dois, vi as produções, as pesquisas de altíssima qualidade e muito, digamos assim, muito complexas que vocês têm desenvolvido, e para nós isso é muito importante. O Brasil vive um momento de mudança na área de avaliação e nós precisamos aprender, né, com essas mudanças, inovações que estão acontecendo em diferentes lugares. Quero agradecer o Ricardo Primi, porque foi ele o grande coordenador, articulador de tudo isso, e agradecer muito o Instituto Ayrton Senna, que é nosso parceiro nesse webinário. O Instituto Ayrton Senna é nosso parceiro, está ajudando, né, a patrocinar todo esse webinário, e é também um parceiro que tem dedicado muita ênfase, tem dedicado recursos, financiado pesquisas na área de socioemocionais, criatividade, enfim, engajamento dos alunos, mobilização dos alunos, enfim. A Tatiana está aqui, ela vai falar um pouquinho, né? Enfim, faz parte do DNA do Instituto Ayrton Senna, essas pesquisas, das quais, inclusive, o Ricardo Primi participa, tanto na BAV como no Instituto Ayrton Senna, desenvolvendo projetos nessa área das habilidades socioemocionais e de altas habilidades. Então, eu agradeço mais uma vez, espero que tenhamos um ótimo seminário, desejo um ótimo seminário para todos vocês e passo, então, para a Tatiana Filgueiras, nossa...
Maria Helena, eu agradeço, né? Conheço a Maria Helena desde que eu era trainee no Instituto. Hoje eu sou vice-presidente aqui e eu tive oportunidade, Maria Helena, de falar uns minutinhos antes de você entrar. A gente tomou essa liberdade e elenquei aqui algumas coisas que a gente tem em comum, né? O trabalho para trazer inovação para todos em política pública. Não é um trabalho fácil, especialmente num contexto pós-pandêmico, né? E contei que a gente tem uma outra coisa em comum, que é termos o Primi aí como líderes de cadeira de comitês científicos, e que isso nos aproxima muito e ajuda na missão de fazer essa ponte, né, entre a ciência e a política pública, que está muito enfraquecida num momento como esse, onde as pessoas precisam atuar de forma urgente e nem sempre estão preocupadas em olhar na ciência o que funciona mais, o que funciona menos, mas também tem um lado da ciência que nem sempre consegue fazer as coisas, ou quase nunca consegue fazer as coisas de forma a atender o timing das necessidades da política pública, né? Então, fico feliz de estar aqui para a gente continuar construindo, né, Maria Helena, o que já vínhamos fazendo, e agradeço demais a oportunidade.
Legal.
Obrigada, Tatiana. Então, volto lá para o Primi para coordenar e um bom seminário para todos nós. Muito obrigada.
Antes de agora iniciar, então, de fato, né, eu queria só agradecer a Maria Helena e a Tatiana. A Maria Helena pensa, assim, já participou muito da educação brasileira em vários papéis, né, contribuindo agora na BAV, mas em muitos papéis e que, com certeza, assim, trouxeram muitas mudanças e inovações para o Brasil. Então, eu queria agradecer, e a Tatiana também como assim, representante do Instituto e liderando todos esses investimentos em pesquisa que a gente tem desenvolvido. Então, eu também fico muito orgulhoso de fazer parte desse grupo, de contribuir, né, e poder ajudar nessa nosso caminho, né, de melhorar a educação no Brasil. Então, é isso. E aí, vamos começar agora para a discussão, né, que agora que a gente tem vários assuntos bem interessantes. Então, eu vou convidar o professor Roger, então, a iniciar, né. Eu peço, então, a todos agora que a gente desligue nossa câmera e áudio, né, que daí a gente fica offline e vamos, então, acompanhar a apresentação do professor Roger. Você pode também compartilhar a tela, tá bom? Sorry, Roger, you can like share your slides. Okay, yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Ricardo. It's appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be here with you all today to tell you about some of my research that I've been doing in my lab and with some collaborators on automating verbal creativity assessments. So just to start off with an overview of the talk today, I'm going to start off with some of the cognitive theory around what I'll be talking about today with respect to creativity research. Then I'll talk about creativity in semantic networks. And then finally, I'll talk about automating verbal creativity tests and the methods that we're using to do that. Okay, so what I'll be talking about today has to do with, in terms of which type of creativity are we measuring. In my work, we focused a lot on divergent thinking. And divergent thinking is the ability to generate ideas that diverge from a given concept or stimulus or starting point. Divergent thinking is thought to differ from convergent thinking in that there's no correct solution. So people are generating several different ideas and there's no single right answer as you would have in, for example, an intelligence test. And there's many ways you could score the responses. You could score them by fluency, so you can count the number of ideas somebody has. Or you could look at the originality of the ideas, which has to do with the creative quality of them, and that's what I'll be focusing on today. And the nice thing about divergent thinking tests in terms of their psychometrics is that they tend to have construct validity and they tend to correlate with real world creative behavior and achievements. So people who tend to do better on these tests generally also tend to also have higher levels of creative achievement and behavior. Okay, so one of the most long-standing theories in the creativity literature is referred to as the associative theory. It's been around for about 60 years and remains quite influential. And according to associative theory, creative thinking involves connecting remote concepts in memory. So specifically semantic memory, which is our memory for concepts, facts, acquired knowledge over time. Associative theory also emphasizes individual differences in creative thinking, and it promotes the idea that creative thinking ability can be characterized by kind of the strength of associations in memory. So people who are more creative will have weaker associations between things that are commonly related, and people who are less creative will tend to have very strong connections to things that are typically related. So this is shown here in this diagram here in terms of these hierarchies, but it basically boils down to people who are considered to be more creative don't have very strong connections to things that are more related. Okay, so more recently, predictions about the associative theory have been put to the test using network science methods, which have been used to model semantic networks. And so one of the earliest demonstrations of this comes from Yoad Kennett and his colleagues in 2014, where they administered several different creativity tests to participants and split them off into more or less or high or low creative groups. And they also asked them to complete free associations tasks, which is thought to be kind of a reflection of this concepts coming from semantic memory. They use network science tools to model and visualize these networks, as you can see here on the right. And what they found basically was that the high creative group had a more flexible network structure. So they had higher clustering, lower modularity, and shorter paths between concepts. So this was basically interpreted to be easier for them or more efficient for them to be making new connections between remote concepts. So if you have to make a connection between concepts that are far apart or semantically remote, if your semantic networks are already kind of more condensed and you have shorter paths to get from one place to another, this is something that's might be beneficial for thinking creatively. And I've been involved in a few studies since this initial work, including a study in 2018 looking at openness to experience. So openness to experience is one of the big 5 personality traits. It's been often referred to as the creative personality trait because it's strongly related to creativity. People who are higher in openness tend to have more, come up with more original ideas. They have more diverse experiences. And they tend to do more creative activities and have higher levels of creative achievement. And what we found was kind of mirroring what I had just shown in the previous slide with respect to creativity tests. So this kind of on the level of personality. So people who are higher in openness had kind of higher connectivity between concepts in their networks. Things were more kind of connected. There were less modules. The paths between concepts were shorter, as opposed to people lower in openness where things are more spread out and there's different modules in their networks. And we've shown this also in the context of metaphor production. So it's another kind of creative use of language in this case. So people who come up with more original metaphors show a similar network structure. So they have higher connectivity, things are more closely represented, shorter path lengths, less modularity again, compared to those who come up with less original metaphors. Their networks are more spread out. They have more discrete modules for different categories. And we've also shown this in the context of education and pedagogy. So we compared students coming from different schooling systems. So students coming from traditional schools and Montessori schools. So this was in Switzerland. And these groups were matched on SES and intelligence. But we still found actually a similar pattern in terms of the Montessori students showing this more flexible structure where things are closer, more connected, there's shorter paths between concepts again. And we also found in this study, and it's been shown before, actually, that the Montessori students tend to score higher on creativity tests as well. So some continuity here in terms of this pattern of semantic networks across a few different contexts and samples. And I just want to briefly mention the authors of the analysis pipeline that I've showed in the past few slides. For anyone that's interested in doing this kind of work, I highly recommend checking out this recent paper from Alex Christensen and Yoa Kennett in Psychological Methods, which has a full pipeline for pre-processing and data analysis and visualization for semantic network analysis. It's actually quite easy to collect the data for these tasks, as well as verbal fluency tasks for semantic categories. So 1 or 2 minutes of just listing animals, for example. And then these tools are very, very powerful and allow you to characterize these network differences. And there's an R Shiny app available out there as well. Okay, so I kind of wanted to start off by talking about some theory of creativity and how this has been kind of captured in the literature so far with respect to semantics and semantic networks and their organization. But now I kind of want to take a step back and say, well, how are we measuring creativity in the first place? And this is a big topic of our panel today, and our other speakers will have much to say about this as well, I'm sure. But one of the big questions is how can we quantify creativity, this kind of very complex ability that involves many different factors. Can we boil it down to a single number? And if so, what's the best way to do that? Something that has been widely done, is still commonly done today, is to ask human raters to give their own subjective judgments on the quality of ideas. So typically in this research, participants will be asked to come up with many different ideas. So on the divergent thinking task, for example, people are thinking often of creative uses for objects. And then the researchers have a huge list of responses, and they have to find a way to put some creativity label on those responses to have reliable data for their analyses. But some issues here that is very time consuming and costly in terms of what raters are asked to do. So they'll have thousands of ideas. They have to provide reliable ratings that are robust and consistent across the whole time that they're evaluating their responses. And so there could be a significant source of noise there, particularly when the raters do not agree with each other on what they think is creative. And so one thing I've been exploring in my research lately is if the scoring process can be automated to some extent using machine learning models and specifically distributional semantics. And that's what I'll be talking about for the remainder of my presentation today. And just as a brief overview of distributional semantics, this is a big field that is really about kind of characterizing natural language using computational models. So distributional semantics quantifies semantic similarities based on the distributional properties of natural language. So by looking at large collections of texts, such as what you would have from Wikipedia or subtitles from movies, any textbooks, encyclopedias, large collections of text are going to be reflecting natural language from humans. And you can use these texts to get at semantic similarity. So, for example, the distance between concepts, which is of interest for the rest of the talk here. So if we're trying to quantify the distance between two concepts, what we can use this approach for is to get a sense for mostly how often they're co-occurring together in these large texts. So in this example here, the terms apocalypse and nuclear power might be more likely to be co-occurring in a sentence or a paragraph of text. And so that would be reflective of their semantic similarities. They have similar meanings. They're kind of represented more closely in this semantic space. And you can see a difference there between nuclear power and celebration. These things are more unrelated, so they're further apart. Okay, so this idea of semantic distance is something that we've been using in our research to try to quantify creative performance on verbal tasks. So it provides an objective quantification of conceptual dissimilarity. So how conceptually different or how far apart are concepts in semantic space. And if you'll recall from the beginning of my talk, I was talking about associative theory and how that's kind of based in this idea of how closely related concepts are, how strongly related they are. So this is kind of based on that foundation. And one of the most widely used methods in literature so far is called latent semantic analysis. It's used also quite a bit outside of creativity research. And it was validated as an approach, or an approach that could be used for creativity assessment back in 2014 in a study that looked at semantic distance between single word associations. And the researchers found there that the semantic distance between single word associations, so presenting people with words and asking them to think of a creative association to that word, the distances between those, as computed by LSA, correlated with a host of other measures related to creativity, such as creative achievement, openness to experience, divergent thinking. So again, pointing to the validity. And what LSA does, as I kind of already mentioned a little bit, is that it computes the co-occurrences of words, or semantic similarity, in large text corpora, such as textbooks. So it's a lot of what LSA is characterized by is kind of textbooks and other works similar to that. And so what we've tried to do is to expand on this foundational work by kind of going beyond LSA. So LSA is actually just one kind of semantic model that's out there. There are many, many semantic models available. And these semantic models and the text corpora that they're built on matter for generalizability. So as I've mentioned, LSA is based on textbooks, but the extent to which the values you get from that, because they're mostly dominated by textbooks and other similar works, might not always generalize outside of those specific kinds of texts. So having a broader sampling of semantic spaces and types of natural languages that you would get from text corpora, such as movie titles, so maybe just kind of conversations between people that are captured in movie subtitles, other sources of text that are available might better approximate human language or natural human language, and just kind of add more to the signal that you would be getting from LSA. And then therefore kind of reducing the bias of just one model by itself. And that's what I'll be talking about for the next several slides, is our general approach here, which has been to take a broader sampling of these semantic models in the service of kind of getting a more generalizable measure of semantic distance for creativity assessment. And so we have used in our recent work 5 different semantic spaces that have some prior validity evidence outside of creativity research. So as I said, these models are used for many, many other things outside of creativity assessment. And their foundational validity evidence mostly has to do with the values that are coming out of the semantic models correlating with human similarity rating. So do people think that 2 concepts are similar? Do they agree with how much the semantic models would say that they're similar as well? Okay, so that we started with 5 semantic spaces that had already some validity evidence outside of creativity work. 2 of them were what's called count models. So one is LSA that I've already mentioned. Another one's called GLOVE, and these models are called count models because they're counting the co-occurrences of the words in semantic space. Okay, we also included 3 predict models. So these are called CBAW, or continuous bag of words, and these are neural networks that are using more of the context of the words that they're trying to compare against. So they're predicting essentially a missing word with surrounding words here. So I have a little figure on the bottom right showing that what these neural network models are trying to do is you have two surrounding words and you're trying to predict what that missing word is. Okay, and there's various corpora that were used to train these models, like subtitles from movies, the British National Corpus, Wikipedia, and so forth. Okay, and here I'm showing in the top right our general approach here, which has been to model a latent factor, a semantic distance factor, out of these 5 models. So instead of just picking one, or instead of averaging across them, we're using confirmatory factor analysis to extract the common variance across the 5 spaces and to model the error variance of each space separately. Okay. So now I'm going to talk to you about a few studies that we have done to try to validate this approach for verbal creativity assessment. Okay, so in one study, we have looked at single word responses. So in these tasks, people are presented with a single word, so it could be a noun, and they're asked to think creatively to come up with another word to relate to that first word. And so what we found is that using this approach to automated creativity assessment with semantic distance, that semantic distance correlates rather strongly with human ratings of novelty and appropriateness and creativity. So here's on the top panel is from one study, just looking at single word associations with semantic distance values on the y-axis and human novelty, appropriateness, and creativity ratings on the x-axis. We can see strong correlations with novelty and inverse correlations with appropriateness. And then creativity also correlated positively in both of these samples. Right, so one thing to notice here is that semantic distance does care more about the novelty side of the assessment, because it's purely tapping into semantic distance, or how far away things, how novel that connection is, whereas creativity might be kind of tempered by the extent to which the response is making sense, or that the human can kind of understand what the person is saying. Okay. And we moved on to extend this work with multi-word tasks. So the first study was, again, just one word and a second word. Here we're looking at multi-word responses, which is common in creativity research. So with divergent thinking test, for example, people are asked to think of alternative uses for objects, and they often express their ideas with several words. And so we found here that semantic distance, these models can also accommodate these multi-word responses, showing good construct validity on this alternate uses task. So what I'm showing here, this really high correlation between human creativity and semantic distance, is at a latent level. So we used CFA for human raters on this alternate uses task, and the semantic distance scores with the 5 models. And this 0.91 correlation is with a couple different tasks, several raters, and several semantic models, all kind of modeled at this higher order level. And in this study, we also found predictive validity of other creativity tests. So with respect to creative metaphor, which I mentioned earlier, the human ratings on the alternate uses task correlated with how creative people's metaphors were, and semantic distance did as well. Alternate uses human ratings correlated with creative achievements. Semantic distance did as well, but not to a not as strongly as human ratings did. And we also have a comparable correlation with creative self-efficacy. Interestingly, with respect to intelligence, human ratings were correlating more strongly in this study with fluid intelligence, whereas semantic distance was less correlated, potentially pointing to some kind of discriminant validity with respect to these models. Okay, and for I just want to mention that a lot of what has been discussed so far with semantic distance has been work alongside Dan Johnson, my collaborator here, pictured in the top right. And Dan has done a lot of the developments of the semantic modeling and the tools that we're using. And he has put an online platform out for people who would be interested in using this. It's called SEMDIS. It's currently available in English, but we're working to expand into other languages right now. Okay, so now let's talk to you about another study where we looked at short stories. So study 1 I mentioned was just single word associations. Study 2 is a little bit more complex, multi-word responses. Now we're looking at even more complex texts where more naturalistic arguably, where people are writing short stories, right? So creative writing is kind of a canonical form of verbal creativity. And we have been interested to see if we could apply the same models to evaluate these more complicated forms of text. And we have developed an approach for this that's based on semantic diversity, or SemDiv for short. And here what we're doing is essentially computing the pairwise semantic distance for all of the words in a story. So the stories I'm going to be talking about in the next couple of slides are participants generating a short story kind of about 3 to 5 sentences long. So very short stories. But here the approach is to compute all of the pairwise distances, as I mentioned, and it really captures how much a story incorporates divergent contexts, situations, and concepts. So kind of a person's ability to sample a broad range of semantic space, grabbing onto different concepts and to pulling them together to make a coherent story. And I just show some examples here of high and low semantic diversity stories. So here's at the top an example of a high diversity story. You can see that many different concepts are accessed by the writer and then woven together to make this story. And a less semantically diverse story has kind of a smaller range or more restricted range of the concepts that are being accessed and put together in their stories. Okay, and so we have shown recently in a paper that's under review, there's a preprint for it as well, that semantic diversity correlates with human creativity ratings of creativity on these stories. So we specifically were interested in comparing the different models that I've been talking about up until this point. So the continuous bag of words models, LSA, GLOVE. So we correlated those with human ratings, but we also brought in a model called BERT, which is more sensitive to context. So it's more caring about the words that are surrounding the given words in the sentences where the semantic distance is computed. And we show that this actually does the best in terms of correlating with human ratings. And it actually correlates more strongly with human ratings than the interclass correlation or the kind of the inter-rater agreement. So more than humans even agree with themselves in terms of the human raters. This does slightly better. In our paper, we have several replications of this finding, and I'm not going to go over that today, but I can send along a preprint for that. And so I want to talk about briefly, before I run out of time, one application of this work so far that is under development, which is looking at college admissions. So in the United States, college admissions exams, or the admissions process involves completing these high stakes tests like the SAT. But unfortunately, those tests show significant racial disparities, so differences between different racial groups. But alongside my collaborators, we've been kind of talking about how creativity tests tend to show little or no racial disparity. There's a kind of a few studies that have been done on this showing that it's kind of not, these tests do not tend to yield such group differences, but they're not included in admissions applications or tests at all. And so one thing that we've been trying to figure out is whether incorporating creativity into college admissions can kind of add a layer of data to the applicant, but then also kind of reduce these group differences. And so we've been applying semantic diversity to admissions essays that have already been collected, and seeing if those scores have any predictive value. And what we found in a couple of pilot studies, again, this is very preliminary data, we found that semantic diversity reduces the disparity compared to SAT in a sample of undergraduate applicants to one of the universities that we've been working with. So if you compare Black and white students, the SAT scores are quite different, but the semantic diversity scores applied to the essays are provide a threefold disparity reduction compared to SAT. And if you take out a vocabulary, covary out the vocabulary of the words students are using in their essays, that even reduces the disparity even further. And we also looked at the predictive value, again, of these scores, and we found that it correlates with markers of college success and creative activity. So in a subsample of participants where we had this data, we found that it correlated with graduating GPA, not a very large effect, but on the same magnitude of SAT. And it also predicted extracurricular involvement during college. So students who were doing more creative activities in college and contributing more to the university in that way. Okay, I know I should probably wrap up here. And so I just want to quickly mention some limitations and some considerations of this work. So one thing to consider is the algorithmic fairness in applying these automated procedures. It's essential to consider their fairness, especially for high stakes situations like college admissions and hiring. The current language models still show significant racial disparities, which potentially underestimates the creativity of some groups. But the question remains of whether humans are more or less biased than the machines when it comes to evaluating verbal creativity. And our pilot data so far points to a little bit more of bias on the human side. But another really important consideration is to look at opportunities for people to game the system. So to kind of just learn tricks and strategies to kind of outperform or kind of think beyond whatever the algorithms are and just put in responses that are going to give them a high score. So kind of still working on that. Future directions, as I mentioned, we're expanding linguistic diversity of these assessments beyond just English. So we're currently working with 9 or 10 different languages. And I'm also involved in different projects that are developing creativity assessments themselves. So self-assessments of creativity using game-based assessments. Also looking at co-creative AI, so humans kind of working in parallel with artificial intelligence. And we're also developing automated measures of non-linguistic creativity, such as drawing. So today I focused a lot on verbal, but we also have some data and some models for handling drawings as well. Okay, so I'll wrap up here. Just want to briefly thank my collaborators, thank my funding from the National Science Foundation and my lab, and thank you all for your attention today.
Hello, thank you very much for your very, very interesting presentation. I have like several questions, but I was, if we can talk in the end, I will send you later and we can discuss. But okay,
sure, absolutely.
We'll keep the discussion for the end. So I will now invite Mathias to come on. Thank you, and thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah,
and so you can also share your slides, Mathias.
Okay, I think my mic was off. Does it work so far?
Yes, now we hear. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, okay. So also really want to thank you and the entire team here for giving me the opportunity to present a little bit of the work and things I've cared about in the past. It's a great honor to present here. And in this presentation, I want to go a little bit step back, so provide a broader view on all the different issues and concerns that have bothered us in the past years regarding how to advance creativity assessments. So I want to start with a general question, and that is, why should we assess creativity in the first place? Of course, from scientific perspective, assessing creativity is an extremely important tool to understanding creativity, and I would even go as far to say that the better creativity measures we are able to develop, the better we actually understand creativity itself. And then once we have these powerful tools, we of course can use them to better understand the phenomenon, but also support creativity in terms of understanding whether conditions are good enough to supportive to creativity, and whether interventions meant to increase creativity are effective. So for this, we need really reliable assessments, of course. And the third point is also that Roger also just pointed on. Now, in the past years, everything has focused very much on intelligence, and it's of course a hugely important trait. But we also see that automations and trends like artificial intelligence become to outpace human in terms of very analytical tasks, and this really urges us to consider other important cognitive skills such as creativity, and that's really important then to apply this to select students, as Roger has just shown, in terms of educational career tracks and also for jobs. So there are many good reasons, in my view, to have invest in good assessments of creativity. But the even more basic question is, how can we actually assess creativity? And it was very interesting. In one large scale or larger study, we asked to what extent people approve the statement that creativity cannot be measured. And actually, across many different countries, there was very much on the edge. So people tended to actually approve of the statement that creativity cannot be measured. So in the public opinion, there's some idea that creativity potentially cannot really be measured. And of course, as creativity researchers, we would say it's very challenging to measure creativity, but we would not agree with this statement. But approaching this complex phenomenon of creativity, really we have to be clear about what we are talking about, because creativity is just a term that is so broadly interwoven into language, and everything can have to do with creativity. So we really must be straight on what we are talking about when we talk about creativity. And even within creativity research, there have been long debates on defining creativity and being clear on the different facets and level that it consists of. So at the very broadest level, we could say in psychology, we discriminate between creative potential and creative behavior. So behavior being the manifest behavior that we can observe readily, whereas the potential is the one we cannot directly observe, but which is actually most interesting to us because it predicts creative behavior. So once we can assess creative potential, we can make some predictions about creative behavior. And also at the level of creative behavior, it's very common to distinguish between different levels of creative achievement. So we distinguish currently between little c, pro c, and big C creativity in terms of everyday creative behaviors, professional levels of creativity, and really eminent levels of creativity. So, and different measures may be needed to assess creativity properly in these different groups. And then, of course, creative behavior can be extremely diverse. We can see creative behavior exerted in so many variants, and that's why we usually also distinguish between creative domains, including visual arts, but many more like literature, music, science, problem solving related creativity, and so on, many domains. So this already shows a bit of the complexity of different and diversity of expressing creative behaviors. At the creative potential level, we would also say we have different traits to focus on, and most generally they include abilities, personality traits, and expertise. And psychology has tools focused on assessing all of these aspects. And finally, one last important aspect of this game is to consider the environment, because we can also try to assess how creative or creativity supportive is an environment. And so these are very diverse levels, and we have to be aware of them when we want to ask how can we best assess creativity. Because for all of these levels, actually, there are very good tasks and have been developed different tasks to assess them. So there have been tests trying to, there are tests devoted to assess creative behaviors and achievements, just to name a few here. There are tests and inventors aiming to assess creative environment or creativity supportive environments. There are tests, of course, for cognitive abilities related to creativity, for traits related to personality traits related to creative potential, and also expertise. And of course, neuroscience also begins to study brain processes specific to creative cognition. So there's a huge diversity. And many of these inventories, fortunately, are also available openly. So there's this Open Science Framework website where you can find creativity scales and also art scales that are free for public use, and it's growing every day. And so after this general definitional aspects, how can we now best assess creativity? As Roger has already introduced, a very common ways to do it with divergent thinking tasks. And for example, the alternate uses task, which is very popular in this field, provides an everyday object and asks to come up with many creative uses of the object in a given time. And people can just name uses like these, for example. And these behaviors, these responses are then being scored for the quantity of responses, but also for the quality of responses. But this is just one task. There are really many, many tasks out there. It's a very diverse field. So there are, of course, verbal tasks. One of them is also, as mentioned by Roger, metaphor production task, where you try to come up with a creative metaphor in terms of figurative language. There are figural tasks, such as picture completion tasks. Divergent thinking tasks have also been applied to mathematics. For example, asking to find similarities between two numbers, 16 and 36, and to see how many different similarities people come up with in a given time. And even in the field of sports. So one colleague of mine, Andreas Fink, has applied divergent thinking to sports, where he shows a football scene, and at the end of the scene, people have to generate sequences of passes that would most effectively work to score a goal between those players that are currently in the offense. Those at the social emotional level, there are tasks. So the tricky part, of course, is for all these responses that we see, how to score or evaluate their creative quality. Two aspects, as also been mentioned before, that we usually focus on is their novelty and their effectiveness. So we most people scholars think it's important to consider both, because novelty is, of course, the first premise, assuming that if it's not novel, it cannot be creative. But if it's novel, it may not necessarily be creative, because if it's somehow completely inappropriate or odd, then it could still be not creative. So that's why we tend to consider both. And so how is this now applied in creativity assessments? This field is really developing very fast, and there still has to also tackle important issues. So I want just to point your attention also to one special issue in the journal Psychology of Aesthetics, Creativity and the Arts in 2019, who has a very nice set of articles describing different advances on different issues in the fields related to creativity assessment. One of these articles, for example, addressed the challenges associated with scoring of divergent thinking. And here you see actually a list of all the decisions associated that you have to make as an experimenter or administrator of such tests in terms of how you realize the task and how you score the task in the end. So that there are really many different ways that have been tried out in research, and accordingly there are many decisions, and we have to make very informed decision on what works best. So one underlying challenge, of course, with divergent thinking task is that it gives a very faceted data structure. As for example, typically data consists of many persons who work on different tasks, which is not uncommon, but then they give not one response, but usually in divergent thinking task, they give multiple responses to each of these tasks, come up with many different ideas, and the number of responses can even vary across the people, so that makes it even more complex. And then for each response, quite commonly we have again a set of raters who judge those responses. This could also be scored differently, like with automatic scores, as shown by Roger. So what we really have to take care about is, in the end, to how would we ensure the reliability of these assessments. As for most tasks, we have, of course, to ensure that it's reliable at the item level, so that we have, of course, enough items, but also collect enough responses from the participants as they provide information on their creativity. Then we also have to be reliable at the rater level. As has been mentioned, raters do not always agree, but if we usually they agree quite decently, and if we have enough raters, then we can also ensure inter-rater reliability, and we can further support this with a devoted rater training. And finally, there are some methods that can help us to correct for difficulty of items and also severity of raters. So in one study that was actually led by Ricardo Primi, we showed how many-faceted rush models can be used to account for differences in item difficulty and rater severity, and how modeling these facets can result in fair scores that are beneficial in terms of reliability, and also helps to reduce the rater load, because this even works for incomplete data designs. Reliability is important. Then, of course, the validity of assessments is also important, and there have been important developments on that aspect as well. So, for example, studies have shown it's really important to use explicit, unambiguous instructions, which seems quite clear, but to really instruct people to be creative in these tasks, because in the past, tests have often asked for try to find many and original ideas, and then people use different strategies in either trying to focusing on the quantity or the quality of ideas. And usually we are more interested in the quality of ideas, so then we should also instruct them accordingly. And this was shown to increase the creativity of responses if people really have a clear instruction. And then, of course, once the instruction is clear, we also have to score people for exactly the thing that we asked them for in the first place. So if you ask them to be creative, they should be scored for creativity, and we should not just count the numbers of ideas or just consider the infrequency of the ideas, but really the creative quality. And raters are still, I would consider, as the gold standard in this context, but as Roger has shown, there are rapid developments on how to objectively score at least the novelty of responses. Raters also have some benefits in terms that they can handle all responses, even if they're orthographically incorrect, if they're not captured by manuals, and they can consider different criteria, novelty and effectiveness, of course. And finally, the third very important aspect to ensure the validity of DT assessments is that we need to avoid the fluency confound that is apparent once we have a different number of responses. So traditional tests, for example, they just use the summative scoring, where you each idea adds points to your originality score, but this was found to be heavily biased by the number of responses and does a poor job in terms of discriminant validity, and you just get another fluency score. So this is why different techniques have been developed on how to assess the creative quality independent of the fluency. And one idea is to use top scoring or max scoring, which is just focusing on a fixed number of ideas, for example, the best 3 ideas. And also in one of our studies, we have shown that actually using 3 ideas, focusing just on the creativity best 3 ideas in 2-minute tasks is beneficial in terms of validity compared to using more ideas, using all ideas, like an average scoring or using just 1 idea. So there is a local maximum in terms of criterion validity. And yeah, snapshot scoring is just another way to do this. So these techniques ensure discriminant validity of the score and also reduce the errata loads. Just to illustrate it a little bit more, we commonly come to this situation. We have 2 people. The first person has like 8 ideas and they are very poorly rated, just 1 or 2 points for creativity. And the second person has only 4 ideas, but he has some of those ideas have high ratings like 3 and 4. So scoring the fluency is straightforward. You just count the number of ideas, 8 versus 4. But scoring the originality with the traditional summative scoring would give a higher creativity to the first person in contrast to the second person. And this doesn't really reflect the person's ability to come up with creative ideas, actually. So average scoring can help, but usually it doesn't give very reliable scores in our experience. And top scoring, for example, top 2 scoring, just focusing on the creative quality of the 2 most creative ideas would even show a higher distinction between those 2 people in terms of their rated creativity. Or top 3 scorings, of course. So another development in this field is, of course, the use of computerized assessments, which offers additional data than just the responses. So here we can also look at the metadata that is associated. So we can measure response times, of course. You can measure at what time people actually engage in the tasks in terms of drawing or writing, and which are the thinking periods. And this, again, then can be used to dissociate time periods, which can be related more to exploration of the task and time periods in actual production of the task, and again, separate time periods of the verification of the task. So, and we see different profiles between people and on how much time they spend on it, and this can offer interesting insights on their creativity again. And along the similar lines, there's also a trend not also to use computerized assessments, but also to put these assessments outside of the lab and assess creativity in the wild, so to say, to actually assess people in their more natural environments, which can be done either with ambulatory assessments, which straightforward as people have smartphones and can answer questions on these devices that they carry with them, but also experience sampling or diary methods, where they report on a regular basis about their creativity. And of course, the main aim of these techniques is to increase the ecological validity of these assessments, because the lab assessments is very controlled, but also has some downsides in terms of external validity. And an important benefit of this kind of tests is also that we embrace within subject variability. So what is usually types of nuisance variance in the lab can be very informative if we can understand why people perform better or worse at different times in different contexts. So we can try to understand under which conditions, for example, being alone versus being in social company, being happy or being less happy, promotes the creativity of this person. And we can model this, of course, then with, for example, multi-level models to see how much variance within the person can be attributed to those external factors. Okay, and just very, just have to check how much time I have. Maybe just very briefly, I give also what we have been very interested in, what neuroscience can contribute to understanding creativity. So there has been, over the last 15 years especially, has been a huge increase in neuroscientific research on creativity, helping us to understand how the brain achieves this kind of extraordinary task, coming up with creative ideas. And just to give you some key insights that also inform on the long run our assessments of creativity. So first of all, what we have really learned quite clearly, that creativity doesn't just happen in the right side of the brain, but as you can see in meta-analysis of neuroscience studies on creativity, we see that both hemispheres are strongly involved. It really depends a lot on the kind of tasks that we are measuring. But this old dichotomy, right brain creativity, is not strongly supported by neuroscience. Then what's also a very interesting insight from neuroscience research is that we have to reconsider the modality of tasks. So usually we just talk about verbal tasks and visual tasks, but actually the brain tells us that even if people engage in verbal tasks, we see a lot of visual activation, for example, of activation of brain areas associated with visual processing. And this really makes us reconsider these simplistic classes and try to understand what kind of modalities are really involved in cognitive processes, are really involved in these tasks. Is it really just verbal, or does it involve more than that? Then we have learned a lot about the role of memory in creativity, and we see that it's not just about semantic memory that we've heard a lot from Roger before also, but equally includes episodic memory. So we see that brain regions associated with episodic memory contribute a lot to imagination processes. And a fourth takeaway is that creative thinking has a lot to do with cognitive control. So we see that brain networks, large-scale brain networks, start coupling during creative thinking, and especially two of them, default mode network and executive control network. And the latter one is really related to goal-directed thinking, and highlights, because creativity, at least in the popular sense, often is associated with spontaneity and just free floating of ideas. But neuroscience also supports this idea, as well as other works, that it has a lot to do with cognitive control devoted to this task. And finally, another takeaway is that creativity also has to do with internally directed attention, which is not straightforward. But if you think about it, if you observe people engaging in creative thinking and imagination, sometimes they really look somewhere else, or even close their eyes to really stay focused on mental representations that they currently create in their mind's eye. So they have a visual representation of what they're thinking about, and this would actually interfere with all the sensory stimulation from the environment. So we actually came across this because we see massive increases of EEG alpha activity during creative thinking, and this is also an indicator of internal focus of attention. And it's interesting to acknowledge that people have to balance their attention towards external demands and also a lot of internal demands when they think creatively. So altogether, this makes us believe that creativity or creative thinking results from the interplay of very specific configuration of memory, attention, and control processes. And the better we understand the very processes involved in creative thinking at the cognitive and neurocognitive level, this also helps us then to apply this to improving our creativity assessments. And this already has fed into this in the past. So thank you very much for your attention, and that's was a short overview on this kind of work.
Hi, Mathias. Thank you very much for your presentation. Really, really interesting. It was really interesting to see like the basic concepts that also Roger touched on. Okay, so now I will call Mario Piacentini to present our final talk today, and then we'll have a discussion. Okay. So you can present your slides here. I think you're muted if you. Yeah. No, it's okay.
Okay, sorry, I'm just struggling to share my screen. Let me try again.
Okay, now it's on.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, so thanks again to Ricardo and to Maria Elena for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. It's quite late in Paris. I will try to explain you what we are doing in Pisa. It's quite an exciting moment for us because I've already spoken about this work in an above webinar several months ago. Now we are actually implementing the data collections of the Pisa 2022 Creative Thinking Assessment. So the data collections are starting now in some countries. They will continue in other countries until November, and this means that next year, around like June next year, we will be receiving the data and starting the analysis. So this was a long journey for us, and I would like just to give you a sense of the type of data that we are collecting, so you can also get a sense of what is coming in terms of insights and results. So a few words on the conceptual framework that we have developed at the OECD with the contribution of a number of international experts. As always in our work, and especially for the innovative domain of Pisa, we need to present a solid case to policymakers for why it's worth investing in assessing something else than mathematics, reading, and science. And it was relatively easy to make the case for the importance of creative thinking. Why? Because we all realize that civilization moved forward thanks to creative insights, that societies nowadays increasingly depend on innovation and the capacity to create new knowledge to address emerging challenges. Think of climate change, for example. Also, we all know how like human activity and the world of work is changing with the advent of artificial intelligence, and we believe that creative thinking is really the human competence that cannot be easily replaced by AI. So it's kind of a unique value that human brings to the world of work and cannot be easily replaced by machines. And in an education context, creative thinking, the capacity of thinking outside of the box and engaging deeply with the content that you are learning can support deep understanding of any subject and lead to feelings of greater self-fulfillment and engagement with school. And we all know how like the problem of disengagement of children from school is a major issue across all countries. So why assessing creative thinking? If it was something that is completely innate and cannot be like and is not malleable, there would be not much important in assessing. But the importance of assessment comes from the fact that creative thinking can be indeed developed. It's a competence that every individual to a greater or lesser degree, has the potential to develop. And also, creative thinking can be nurtured at school and across all the different subjects. So not just limiting it to the arts. And we know, and we have seen also from the previous presentations, that many factors are beneficial to the development of creative thinking. So it's possible to imagine a number of innovations in pedagogies and in the general organization of schooling that basically invite students to be creative, to express their creativity. And this can be like by giving students positive challenges, encouraging them to engage in a standard project and in teamwork, recognizing and encouraging them when they come up with new ideas, and also avoiding blaming students for making mistakes whenever they choose to go off path and explore new things. The definition of creative thinking in Pisa is the following. Creative thinking is defined as the competence to engage productively in the generation, evaluation, and improvement of ideas that can result in original and effective solutions, advances in knowledge, and impactful expression of imagination. So you see in this definition, there is a strong emphasis on the idea that we are measuring idea generation processes. In our framework, we go into some details in order to describe like the different things that we would like to measure in an international assessment of creative thinking that, of course, would also be relevant to assess in the Brazilian context. And there are at least three major and distinct things that we would like to get information on. First is what is often referred to as creative potentials. What are the characteristics of individuals in terms of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that enable them to be creative? And in the framework, we distinguish multiple ones. Some that are related mostly to knowledge of a particular domain that is generally recognized as important for generating creative value, but also specific cognitive skills and approaches and attitudes such as goal orientation and openness to experience. The second thing one would like to measure is not really the potential, but the actual expression of creative thinking in the classroom. And we can think of essentially 3 types of manifestation of creative thinking that we can see in students' work. The first one is like creative expression, so their capacity to create artifacts, products that can be pieces of written text or drawing or any kind of generative activities. But it also, creative thinking is also made evidence by the participation in activities where students generate new knowledge. For example, like participating in a debating class or find new solutions to problems. This could be like scientific problems or problems in social studies classes. And finally, an important dimension is to try to understand how both like this manifestation of creative work in the classroom or the individual enablers, these individual characteristics can be nurtured and are affected by the environment in which students learn and grow. So it's also important to collect information on the general cultural norms and expectations that exist across different countries and how these are related to the actual creative products that the students are able to generate and their creative potential, but also other aspects like the general pedagogical approaches that are adopted in the classroom and the overall classroom climate. So we speak of this factor as social enablers. In Pisa, we mostly we have 2 main instruments. One is the cognitive test, that engage students in 1 hour. And then we have a second instrument that is at the end of the test, when the students are tested in creative thinking and also in one of the main Pisa subjects like reading or mathematics. We also ask them to spend 30 minutes responding to a questionnaire. And in the questionnaires, we collect information on other enablers, such as their openness, their motivation, goal orientation, inclination to engage in collaborative work with others. And also we have in Pisa, we ask the students to report on their general classroom climate, on how they interact with their teachers, for example, whether they perceive that their teacher encourage them to come up with new ideas, or rather frustrate this originality and active participation. And we also use in Pisa, collect data in Pisa through teachers and school questionnaires. And so this will be a major source of data on social enablers that we will be able to relate, to analyze together with the results of the cognitive test and the students' responses to the questionnaires. So now I'm going to focus on the cognitive tests, so on the skills that we measure in Pisa. We have 3 different facets in this competency model or measurement model. The first one is called generate diverse ideas. And here we are focusing on what in previous presentation has been referred to as flexibility. So we are asking students we are assessing students' capacity to think flexibly across domains, for example, coming out with 2 different ideas for a story. The second facet that we are assessing is called generate creative ideas. And here, the core skills that we are looking at is originality. So the capacity to search for ideas that other people might not have come up with. For example, again, an original story idea, an original way to communicate a message in a visual form, or an original solution to a problem. And I will give you an example to explain you how we determine the originality of the students' responses. The third facet in the competency model is evaluate and improve ideas. Again, it's similar to generate creative ideas. We're asking students to come up with a new idea. The difference is that in this, for this facet, the students are not starting from scratch. They are presented with an existing solution or an existing story, and we are asking them to improve it in an original way. And again, something we have not discussed today as much, but also the other speaker have touched upon, is the fact that there is a very big debate on in the creativity and creative thinking literature on whether this construct is domain general. So if one is creative in one particular subject or domain, is also creative across all the other domains, or is rather domain specific. In general, the experts that have been working with us has emphasized the importance of situating the assessment task in different domains. There are like 2 domains that are written expression and visual expression that are more related to the to imagination, so the capacity to look at your inner self and come up with a creative way of expressing your ideas, either in written forms or in a visual form. The other 2 domains, social problem solving and scientific problem solving, it's again about generating ideas, but the idea generation is functional to solving some kind of social or scientific issue. And the fact that we have a balanced representation of these 4 domains is important, because we can also examine whether, like in some countries, students excel in some areas or some domains. For example, they are very good at generating creative ideas for solving scientific problems, but are relatively weaker when it comes to leave space to their own imagination. So this might reflect differences in curriculum and differences in what is considered important in different education systems. So let's try to be a bit more concrete on the type of tasks that we are giving the students in Pisa. So these are not real tasks; it's just for illustration. This task is in the written expression domain. So in general, and in many of the tasks that we have developed in Pisa, and we have developed quite a lot of them, we provide a kind of a stimulus to the students, and we are asking them to make idea associations starting from this stimulus. This item is a generate diverse idea 1. So we are asking students to come up with 2 different stories. And what we evaluate here is whether they can generate stories that are appropriate. And with appropriateness, we mean that they are on task, so that they actually read like stories, and are also on topic, that they make reference, some kind of reference to the stimulus. And then we are also considering, as I said, their like idea flexibility. So the capacity of generating 2 ideas that are sufficiently different. So for example, if a student says the story is about an arrow that travels around the world, or the story is again about an arrow that navigates across planets. There are differences in words, but the idea is basically the same. So it will not be given credit for generate diverse ideas. This is a variation of the same items, but just to show you what it means, the generate creative ideas facet. Here we are not asking the students to generate multiple ideas. It's more a convergent thinking process. They have still to search their mind for possible association between these different images, but come up with their own story idea. And what we are asking explicitly them to do is to come up with an idea that is original. And we define original as an idea that your fellow students would not have come up with. So for example, in this case, when you see these images on the dice, you can imagine that many students make up a story that is about someone having a broken heart because he's leaving his home and he has to travel around the world to seek fortune elsewhere. So this is a kind of a conventional idea. So if the student make this type of idea association, he will not be given credit for originality. And this is, again, just to explain you how it works, the evaluate and improve. In this case, they are provided with an idea, and then they are given a set of additional figures. And what they have to do is to continue a story that has been given to them. And you can imagine how this type of set of item types can be also applied to other domains. For the visual domains, we have created a simple digital interface in which the students can drag and drop stamps or images to create some kind of visual product. So they are creating something visual, and I've seen a lot of students' responses, and I can tell you that even without letting them to use like a free drawing tool and just letting them associate stamps and images, they can come up with extremely creative products. And again, the idea of not letting them draw freely on the computer, it is because we are interested in whether they are capable of coming up with ideas. We are not really interested in whether they are good at drawing, or whether they are excellent at drawing. We are looking at really at this capacity of generating ideas. This is a social problem solving example. Again, generate diverse ideas. The problem that is presented in this slide is the problem of water scarcity that exists in different regions of the world. and we are asking students in this item to come up with different ideas to solve the problem of water scarcity. And then the unit develops into asking them to design an application for smartphone to save water. And this is just an example to give you like what kind of scientific problems we are asking them to work on. They are not problems that require a lot of knowledge of science. They are mostly engineering type of problems in which we ask them, for example, to invent the bicycle of the future and to come up with different improvements to a bike. And again, we evaluate whether they come up with different ideas. So if one idea is like to make some to add some kind of engine to the bike, or like the second idea is to power the bike with electricity, these are not fundamentally different ideas. So the students will not get credit for flexibility. How do we code the responses? This essentially what this is a relatively complex slide to explain, but I will try to explain you simply what we're asking the decoders to do. They go through a step-by-step process. The first thing that decoders have to evaluate is whether the idea, the response of the students is appropriate or not. Again, in most definition of creativity or creative value, we always consider that having something that is really, really super original, but is completely unrelated and out of task is not really creative. So the first step is establishing whether the student response is on task and on topic. If the student failed to provide a response that is on task or on topic, the coding process stops there, and basically they get 0 credit. Then for generate diverse ideas, we provide a partial credit or a full credit by evaluating whether the ideas that they have created are sufficiently different. So if they can come up with 2 ideas that are sufficiently different from each other, they get a partial credit. If all the 3 ideas are different, they get full credit. And this similar step-by-step process also exists for generate creative ideas. I just wanted to explain you briefly how we establish originality. Is based on essentially on the frequency of the student responses. We have collected hundreds of student responses from in a first step from 6 countries, in a second step from 15 other countries, and we have basically went one by one and we identified the most common themes of the most common type of responses of the students. And so we have built these like coding documents in which we tell the raters what are the type of responses and what are the themes that are conventional. So if you go back to my example on the dice, we have for like all these story making problems, we list to the raters the 3 most common conventional themes or type of responses that the students have created. If the students like provide a response that is in one of these conventional, so highly frequent themes, they don't get full credit for generate creative ideas. They have still a chance to generate full credit if they follow a conventional themes, but they are able to make their own response different. For example, including additional details or different modes of execution. So you can see that, again, we are not asking the raters to evaluate in general the value of the student responses. We are asking them to go through a series of evaluation that are fairly objective. They have to establish whether the response is on topic, or whether in the items with multiple response, whether the responses are sufficiently different from one another. And I forgot to say that we also provide categories of responses to guide the raters in establishing whether a response belong to one category or to another category. So it has been a tremendous amount of work. The main work was not so much in designing the items, but really in creating this coding material and coding instruction and populating them with examples that could help raters achieve some level of consistency. And then we went through a series of validation activities. Again, validity reviews on the items by a number of experts, cognitive laboratories with the students to see how they were reacting to the task. Then a series of small-scale validation exercises that were extremely helpful to refine the coding method, and also to collect example of students' responses that over the years we have accumulated to have sufficient data to establish what is a conventional response to an item and what is a non-conventional response. And then we have, with the COVID, there was a postponement of Pisa. So actually we had two field trials, one in 2020 and one in 2021. So again, this was an opportunity to collect more data and refine all the material. Just a final word on the questionnaire. It's a 5 minutes module in the main student questionnaire. So this means that we will have data from all the countries participating in Pisa. It's not an optional module. So we cover different things like other types of attitudes that are part of creative potential, such as curiosity and openness, goal orientation, and creative self-efficacy. We collect information on students' beliefs about creativity, whether creativity is something that is innate or something that you can develop, the creative activities they undertake in the classroom and in the school, and their perception about their teachers and their school environment. And then we have a number of questions on education approaches, beliefs and activities in the school, teacher, and parent questionnaires. So I think this is all from me. I hope it was clear, but I'm here to answer to any question you might have. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mario. Really, really interesting. Yeah, so now we are in our final session of discussions and questions. So I'm following here in the YouTube, so I have like about 40 people watching and also commenting and make some questions. So I don't know if let's see, Roger is here. Just one general comment I wanna make is that I think this is a very, like you said, Mario, it's a really exciting time because we see all these developments on the assessing and understanding creativity, like Roger and Mathias presented on the neuroscience side, on the assessment side, and technology aspects of artificial intelligence being applied. And at the same time, Pisa is like doing this like enormous work to like do this study, right? Because I think this will be very, very important, not only for understanding students' abilities and new, more complex abilities of creativity, that's very important, but also for the research on creativity, right? All this, because I guess this, I don't know if Mathias is agree with me on that, but I think that will be the most comprehensive or large study on creativity ever. Like this, like it's 50 something countries with all these divergent thinking tasks on with raters and with this kind of traditional like zero originality tables that you create. So. And that would be amazing. I think for education in general, of course, but also for the understanding of creativity. I don't know what do you think, Mathias? If you have this, share your opinion with me that this is there any other study that is large like this one?
Certainly not. So I'm extremely excited about the scale of this endeavor, and in science we hardly have the opportunity to get, of course, this size of data, and that's a constant issue, of course, also that studies may be underpowered, and that we don't get also to always at as robust conclusions as we wanted to, and here we would really see also, of course, the cultural aspect, and the not just one very homogeneous sample. So much of research is focused on very homogeneous samples, well-educated university students very often. So we will see there's so many exciting things that you can do with this data, and this with all the measures that are also collected in addition to the main creativity measures. This will give unprecedented insights into creativity. I'm completely sure.
Yeah. So one question for Mario now is, so you said you already did the field trials, right? With is that with all the 50 something countries, or? And another question is, do you consider, for instance, maybe one way? So we saw that there is a very high correlation between originality measures and this semantic distance between ideas, and we have already models for several languages, right? So of this semantic kind of vectors, or I would say vector representation of words that these models use. Like they have like this vector based on studies of Wikipedia and other documents. So, and we know we have this. So do you have an idea to considering maybe, for instance, first going to this, doing this kind of scoring based on semantic distance and providing this to the raters to facilitate scoring? So do you have any plans for that, or ideas, considerations, or, of course, this is completely new. I don't know if this will be possible anyway.
Yes, we have been long at the very beginning of the project, like several years ago. We were really hoping into the possibility of using some kind of automated scoring based on natural language processing and semantic analysis. We hit a big rock, a mountain, that is the fact that the basic Pisa is run in over 100 languages, and so like it was clearly apparent, at least at the time. Then I don't know if this problem was solved. Then that generalizing methods that we know work for English or for a few other languages to 100 countries would have been a massive investment in creating sufficient, in basically teaching the machine with sufficient data and responses. That said, now it could be like so we are not doing that, and we have developed all this relatively complex method with human raters that is also costly. So it will be a big investment that the countries are making to first to train all these raters, and then to score all these responses, and it will not be optimal. Yes, all the countries have gone through a field trial, some in 2020, others in 2021, with all the possible problems you can imagine of conducting studies in schools during the big pandemic. But we have a lot of data. We have sufficient confidence on reliability, on the inter-rater reliability. Some open question, again, it's we are not achieving the same standards of reliability that Pisa achieves for very simple constructed responses, such as when did the Battle of Waterloo happen, in which like the student can only put the right number or the wrong number. So there is no real, here they actually elaborate, they provide elaborated responses. For example, engineering solutions, like some are extremely creative, or short stories. So there is a margin of error, and but there will be a lot of data that, so I was really imagining a reverse process in which we provide the data to feed your engine, and then making it possible to apply automated scoring approaches for other studies, or even on the same data. So it was the main constraint was a feasibility constraint. I think one of the key values of doing this in actually 66 countries will be that that in Pisa we have a scoring method that focuses on making sure that we have comparable data across countries, but there are other ways, and Mathias spoke about them, of using the data or scoring the data. There are, for example, consensual methods having multiple raters that agree on other elements that are not necessarily originality or fluency or flexibility, but more generally the creative value of the response. So the data will be available as soon as we release the report in early 2024. And then it will be your creativity of the various researchers to use them, and maybe use them better than we are doing at the OECD.
Yeah, one thing, it will be really interesting. There is an open question, right? So we have been seeing these studies that show that these semantic distance measures correlates very highly with originality, right? Because they measure the distance between ideas, and they are like highly correlated with these raters scoring of originality. And but this was done in one language, two languages, and this Pisa data having like all this raters scoring, and so will be made be possible to use different models created in different languages, for instance, global vectors in different languages, and see if they correlate in the same way in different countries. And if this is true, maybe this opened the doors for like including this kind of item in the future with kind of automated scoring of creativity. And also all the validity stuff that we'll be able to, you guys and researchers will be able to do, seeing if this predicts different things in school. So this will be very exciting, right? One question for Mathias. I know you worked together with Roger in this, so I think it's related to some of the data he presented, but I will ask you, and I am sure that you have some ideas on this. And it was very interesting that there is like a highly positive correlation between originality and semantic distance. But then a negative correlation with appropriateness, right? So, and considering that the scoring of these ideas is, if they are useful and I am interpreting this as appropriate, right? And original, maybe. So, do you think that maybe this is a problem for those automated measures, because maybe like a very inappropriate measure will also be very distant from the others, right? So how can we like separate these, and do you have any idea or experience on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. So okay. Actually it's not really surprising that we see this pattern. At least also we see a similar pattern when we go for human ratings, separate ratings of novelty and appropriateness. Then actually appropriateness ratings by human will also be negatively correlated with creativity. And one important reason for that is that actually the most boring and common ideas are also highly appropriate, right? So that's kind of drives the negative correlation between appropriateness. So appropriate ideas are of course also not necessarily creative. So what we found in one study is that once you control for the novelty of the ideas and ensure in a way that you only focus on novel ideas, then the appropriateness actually positively predicts the creativity, but only within the novel ideas and not across the whole range of very, very diverse ideas. Yeah, and exactly as you said, this is of course an important issue that highly novel ideas can be either extremely creative, but of course extremely inappropriate ideas sometimes also can be highly novel. And this will be a tough challenge for automatic scorings to dissociate between novel ideas in terms of their quality, task appropriateness, for example. But yeah, with creativity put into this task, I think it's maybe not unsolvable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was also, if I may, was also like a highly contested topic for us on defining what it means to be creative in the science domain, because yes, there there was we got a lot of questions also from the countries, from the reviewers on how do you exactly delimit what is appropriate and inappropriate. We try to define, provide examples of, the general guidance was if it could possibly work is appropriate, but then ignore all the things related to efficiency of the solution and yes, and so this was quite a difficult thing also for many people to digest, that we are really we're looking for out of the box thinking, and this might imply coming out with something that for a very easy fix you come out with something with a solution that is hyper complicated and hyper costly, but is original. And this is what we are valuing, but it's not not so easy to define appropriateness, even for humans, not just for machines.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's completely right. Because if you knew this, then we would really, this would be very important also for investment people, right, to understand which of these crazy new ideas will really make it in the end. And there have been a lot of also misjudgments in the past where people thought, okay, this can never work and this is so crazy idea, and then they were actually told wrong. And also I fully agree that also for humans it's a highly, we can quite fairly easily tell if it's novel, but if it's really effective and maybe under given conditions or in the future, and that's really hard to tell, and also a challenge for humans.
Yeah, very interesting. And this reminds me of an interview from the director from Pixar, and he was telling that he managed sessions of creative, the creation of stories in Pixar. So they have some agreement between them that they don't criticize ideas in the first week of the discussions, because every novel idea, so if you start criticizing right in the beginning, so you kill the novel idea. So they have this commitment, so they will hear and not criticize for at least some time, and then after that, so because all the initial ideas are always they have failures, but in order to keep the creative process, so they came up with this solution for meetings. That's a really interesting idea. I think that's and it speaks about this difference between appropriateness and novelty, right? One thing for both of you, and I heard from other research on creativity to say, no way that we'll be able to to develop original criteria of originality across countries that will be comparable. So that's one thing that I heard from some research on the area. So what do you think, guys? So, and also, so do you have any already data on that, Mario, that people can agree, or different countries come up with the same set of like
Yes,
conventional
yes,
ideas and
yes, we do, and it's one of the primary challenges for the comparability of our results, and we are applying in general we need a reference in Pisa, so we are applying this international benchmark that basically sum up all the in the field trial. We have asked all the raters to code the ideas to classify them into categories. So we know for each countries for how many responses are in team 1, in team 2, in team 3, up to team 8. Okay. And we use this common this really purely statistical count to determine what the 3 main teams were. But of course we observe differences across countries. These 3 teams are the 3 teams that are most prevalent globally, but not across all the countries. There will be the possibility of analyzing data in relative terms, like using categories that are defined country by countries. But yes, this is one of the interests. It's challenging to accept to the countries, especially because they are used to PISA data and to the idea of an absolute comparability. I personally, as a researcher and not as assessment developer, I find it quite fascinating, the fact that we observe some differences across countries. Can we handle them to build measure? Probably yes. Do they complicate the interpretation of the results? Yes. Do they? But if we didn't observe them, I would have thought that we were not measuring the right thing. So maybe it gives us a source of a challenge, comparability challenge, but a bit of confirmation on the validity side.
Very interesting. Yeah, well, so I think it's very, very late for you guys, right? So you're in Europe right now. So I would like to thank you. So we have some comments that very positive comments and very interesting about, for instance, one person like Solange told about the data that I think Roger presented, that this data on creativity has less difference between different socioeconomic status, and this could be less bias, and that would be really interesting. And anyway, but I would like to thank you guys for this, for your willingness and your generosity to come and present this to us, and this is really exciting, and we are very looking forward to this endeavor for Pisa, and as researchers also to work with this and try to help and build knowledge, and thinking creatively to build knowledge on that. Right? So thank you. In the name of Abavi, I would like to thank you guys, and hope that we meet again in the future, discussing more about this data and learning more. Okay.
Yes, please share my email for any additional question.
Okay.
Thanks again, Ricardo.
Thank you.
The same here. Thank you very much for having us. It was really enjoyed it.
Thank you guys. So have a good night. Bye bye. Então, eu acho que a gente vai encerrar agora. Eu agradeço então também as pessoas que estão participando, né, que estão aqui com a gente. Foi um seminário longo, então agradeço a vocês e um abraço. Tchau, então.